It's hard to say what I want my legacy to be, what I want people to say when I'm long gone. I want people to look at me as a full-on entertainer and a good person.
Aaliyah's last interview hits different now, and not because she said anything explosive or dramatic, but because of how steady she looked, how composed, how certain she sounded when she talked about legacy, about wanting to be remembered as a full-on entertainer and a good person, like someone who felt secure in her trajectory, not someone nearing an ending. And that's what makes the timing feel almost cinematic in hindsight, because in 2001, she wasn't declining, she wasn't boxed in, she wasn't being phased out, she was expanding, crossing into film with Romeo Must Die, preparing to dominate again with Rock the Boat, building a brand that felt futuristic but effortless, minimal but magnetic. And when you watch that final interview knowing what happened days later, the calmness becomes unsettling because there was no sense of slowdown, no narrative of burnout, no visible cracks in momentum, just ascension. And ascension is what makes sudden disappearance feel unnatural, because culturally, we understand decline, we understand scandal, we understand fall from grace arcs, but we struggle with interruption at the peak, and August 2001 was exactly that.
What's up, what's up? This is Beyonce on the red carpet with one of the hottest female artists out here, Miss Aaliyah. How you doing, girl?
It's so good to see you again.
You too. She's just looking fabulous.
Thank
what are you
you.
wearing tonight?
I'm wearing Gucci shoes, Gucci. Got a little Indian jewelry working.
Oh, that is hot.
Thank
All right.
you.
Now, you've been working it with these movies. Were you nervous?
Very nervous, but I'm real happy. It's something I've wanted for a long time, so
Yes.
to finally make that transition.
Interruption, Bahamas shoot. Last-minute location shift from Miami to the islands. Green screens already handled. Production adjustments that, at the time, didn't seem dramatic, but now get dissected frame by frame. Why move the shoot? Why rush the wrap? Why leave early? Why board that specific twin-engine plane? Why overload it? Why risk it? Why not wait? Why not take another aircraft? Why insist on flying out immediately? And officially the explanation centers around aviation failure, weight limits exceeded, pilot issues, tragic miscalculation. And legally, that's where the story rests. But culturally, the conversation never fully rested there because of what followed. And what followed wasn't chaos, it was transition.
Allegedly, Sean Carter is responsible for enacting Hype Williams to put Aaliyah on a faulty plane to move her out the way as punishment for rejecting him, and so he could level up Beyonce, who was struggling. Let's just say allegedly that happened.
And transition in the entertainment industry never happens in isolation. It's always tied to positioning, alliances, timing, who stands next to who and who doesn't. And in the early 2000s, that landscape was shifting rapidly. Rockefeller consolidating power, business partnerships evolving, solo eras forming, branding tightening, and within 2 years of Aaliyah's passing, the hierarchy of female R&B shifted permanently, Beyonce stepping into solo dominance, dangerously in love, igniting a new chapter, Jay-Z expanding his empire beyond rap into full-scale business influence. And when fans look back at that sequence, they don't just see independent events, they see a timeline, and timelines are what fuel mythology. Because when a vacuum opens at the top of the culture, someone fills it, and sometimes that filling feels natural, other times it feels
He was working with R. Kelly, and they were making so many records together. You know, they made all those records together. They both Aaliyah. They shared so much in common.
strategic, and that perception alone is enough to keep theories alive, especially when you factor in that Aaliyah wasn't disconnected from power circles. She was publicly dating Damon Dash, Jay-Z's business partner. She was around the same industry rooms, the same executives, the same decision makers, and stories from that era often mention that everybody was trying to get close to her. Admiration was heavy, attention was real, proximity was undeniable, and proximity in high-level entertainment always carries weight, because access equals influence, and influence equals leverage. And even if none of that proves anything directly, it builds atmosphere, and atmosphere is what conspiracy culture thrives on. Then layer in the Paris interview clip where Aaliyah described a dream about darkness, someone chasing her, fear, then suddenly lifting off, flying away, unreachable, and after her death, that clip took on a life of its own, not because it was a confession, but because tragedy rewrites context. And when you pair poetic language about flying away with a fatal plane crash days later, the symbolism feels too sharp to ignore for some audiences, and that's how pattern stacking begins.
But what I was really more tight about was that I had heard that Lenny Kravitz had offered her a jet and that Hype had took the jet. So that's what really pissed me off about the situation when I heard about that. So you could ask Hype about that.
That's what I said. Have you ever talked to Hype about it?
Yeah.
And how did that conversation go?
Ask him.
But I also am asking you.
Yeah, but ask him.
Not through evidence, but through alignment, dream imagery, timing, industry shifts, sudden power consolidation, and the myth expands further when internet culture starts assigning archetypes, labeling Beyoncé as the untouchable queen figure, hyper-controlled, strategic, private, symbol-heavy performances, fueling narratives about hidden hierarchies and elite structures. Jay-Z positioned as the ultimate industry architect, businessman, gatekeeper, and once those archetypes solidify in public imagination, every past event gets filtered through that lens. Because when people believe power is centralized, they stop viewing events as random.
I had
that
forgotten
Jay-Z
that
knew about what happened to Aaliyah.
Right, exactly. I mean, I didn't think about that, but yeah, it's like here is this guy who was in love with this girl, and now your business partner is doing a project on your label with a guy that essentially raped your girl, and like, yo, what's going on here?
Right.
And start viewing them as chess moves. And the early 2000s were a chessboard, labels battling for dominance, artists repositioning, executives aligning, careers launching and dissolving, and Aaliyah's death happened right at a pivot point in that evolution, which makes the timing feel amplified, not because there's a courtroom revelation connecting dots, but because culturally the shift was visible. 2001 marked an end of one era and the ignition of another, and whenever eras shift abruptly, someone asks who benefits, and that question alone keeps conversations alive decades later. Add in resurfaced commentary from outspoken industry figures over the years, hinting at deeper politics in music, add in the Kelly association layer that shadows parts of that era, add in the Damon Dash and Jay-Z fallout years later, and suddenly the narrative web becomes dense, not necessarily factual in a legal sense, but emotionally persuasive to audiences who already distrust entertainment power structures. And distrust is the oxygen of conspiracy, especially in an industry historically built on image management and quiet settlements. And when fans revisit that final interview through that distrust, they don't see a simple reflection on legacy. They see a timestamp before the board reset, they see a calm before a cultural storm, they see a rising star frozen in youth, while another era accelerates. And that contrast is powerful because Aaliyah remains eternally 22, eternally ascending, eternally potential, while the industry moved forward without pause, smoothly, almost too smoothly for some observers. And it's the smoothness that unsettles people, because when something seismic happens and the machine doesn't visibly stutter, it reinforces the perception that the machine is bigger than any single artist, no matter how luminous. And that perception feeds the idea that shifts are orchestrated rather than accidental, even when documentation says otherwise, because documentation doesn't erase emotional dissonance, and emotional dissonance is what drives long-term cultural suspicion. And so Aaliyah's last interview becomes more than a farewell moment. It becomes a symbolic checkpoint, the final frame before a power recalibration. And maybe that's why it refuses to fade from conversation, because she didn't decline into obscurity. She didn't scandal herself out of relevance. She was interrupted at velocity, and interruption at velocity always feels unfinished. And unfinished stories demand explanations. And when official explanations feel too simple for an impact that massive, audiences create their own, not necessarily out of malice, but out of the human need for coherence. And in a world where timing, power, and symbolism intersect at the highest levels of entertainment, coincidence rarely satisfies people, and that's why, even now, more than than 20 years later, the clip resurfaces, the timeline gets restacked, the questions get whispered again, not necessarily about a single flight, but about the invisible mechanics of an industry that has always operated behind velvet curtains, and whether what happened in August 2001 was purely tragic miscalculation or simply the moment the board changed forever, one thing remains undeniable. The cultural shift that followed was permanent, and the last calm interview of a rising star now feels less like closure and more like the quiet frame before everything accelerated.